Hello students, welcome back to the shop. This is job 3, fuel system, carb cleaning. This picture's a picture of a carb that is pretty gummed up. Somebody left some fuel in there for too long. Here we have the parts of a carburetor, and we will be disassembling a carburetor and inspecting these pieces, so it's good to know their names. This here is the throttle valve. It controls the speed of the engine. It controls how much air comes into the engine. This screw right here is the idle speed adjustment screw. We will be adjusting that to control the speed of the idle. The other valve over here is the choke valve. The choke is used to start the engine. It gives it a richer mixture. Way over here on the fuel line is a fuel filter. Keeps all the floaties and dirt out of the carburetor. On the other side here is the float needle and the inlet. We are going to take that apart and inspect that. At the bottom of the carburetor here is the main jet, and the main jet screws into the emulsion tube. That's the circuit that supplies fuel to the engine at high speed. This is the float bowl. This is the float. It floats on top of the fuel, and it's like an on-off switch. When the fuel level goes down, it lets more fuel in, and when the fuel gets to the right level, it shuts the fuel off. And finally, there's no arrow for this one, the pilot jet. This controls the amount of fuel that the engine gets when it's running slow at idle. There's a fast forward of me disassembling the engine, taking off the airbox, and then we're going to remove the carburetor. So I pull off the fuel line and the linkages. Now you don't need to take off the muffler, but it makes it a little easier to see. So I pop off the muffler. That gives me access to the bolt that holds on the tank. And so I pop off the tank as well. The air cleaner, the carburetor, the fuel tank, and the fuel line are all parts of the fuel system. Here's the carburetor. I'm going to take apart a few pieces to clean it and inspect. This little bowl here is called the sediment trap. It lets heavy dirt particles settle out of the fuel system before they go in the carburetor. It's a service part, so you remove the bowl and you have a look and blow out the inside. This one's nice and clean. Then I'm going to remove the main float bowl. So you take off this bottom nut. On some engines, that nut is also the main jet, and you can clean the jet, put it back in. This one, it's just a nut, and the jet is built into the emulsion tube of the carb. Pull off the bowl. We'll have a look inside the bowl. It is squeaky clean, not like that picture in the first slide. Then here's the float. This is how it goes up and down to control the amount of fuel coming into the engine or into the bowl. Remove the hinge pin and pop out the float. And then we're ready for some inspection and some cleaning. Here's how you clean the carburetor. First, I'm going to remove the idle speed screw because it blocks the pilot jet. So I take the speed screw all the way out. I'll just put that to the side. And then the pilot jet on this one is a plastic plug. Just weasel that out. And in the end of it is a tiny little orifice. We'll have to spray that out with compressed air. So I'm going to clean the pilot jet. I'm going to clean that idle circuit. That's where the jet was. I'm going to blow out the main jet and emulsion tube. I'm going to blow out the fuel inlet. I'm going to blow through these air bleeds. And then finally, I'm going to blow out these air bleed holes. And they're very tiny. And I have them enlarged in the picture on the left. This controls the amount of fuel the engine gets at low speeds, and it controls how the engine accelerates. So the way it accelerates from idle to high speed. Very important that you blow each one of these out. Here's a close-up of the float and the float needle. The needle should be a perfect cone on its tip, and there should be no wear on it. And the float should be sealed. So the way you check the float is you shake it in your ear, and if you hear fluid inside, that means that the float has a crack in it and it has sunk, and that float will need to be replaced. After the carb's clean, we have to reassemble the float and the needle. So the float needle goes back down into the inlet, and the hinge pin holds the float on. And then we have to check to make sure it's sealing. So the way we do that is holding the carb upside down. That's right side up. That's upside down. The weight of the float on that needle should seal 1 to 2 psi of air, which is exactly the same as you can blow with your mouth. So I'm going to blow in here, and we'll have to listen for the air, if it leaks or not. So if I don't touch the float, it shouldn't leak. If I lift it, we should hear a little bit of air. Here we go. Sounds perfect to me. Bam. Fast forward assembly. Reinstall the gaskets. Install the linkage and springs. Put the control back on. More gaskets, the airbox, tighten the screws that hold the carb back down. And now we're ready for the governor adjustment. Here we are at the dreaded governor adjustment. Anytime you take the carburetor off of the motor, right here, and put it back on, it's going to be in a different spot. So you have to set up the governor right here so that you remove the slack out of the system, so the mechanism inside the motor can control the speed of the motor. So you got to take all the free play out. This is how you do it. First, you observe which way this shaft turns when the throttle goes to full. So as I let my finger loose here, it rotates, that goes to full throttle, and this shaft here is turning clockwise. So I loosen the nut, the lock on the shaft. I max out the shaft all the way clockwise while this is being held at full throttle. So I'm holding that with my needle nose, and then I just tighten the clamp again. Now that governor will work properly again. Magic. In real life, if you worked at a shop and did a fuel system clean, you would clean out the tank. You would replace the fuel line. You wouldn't reuse it. And you would replace any gasket that you disturbed. So the carburetor gasket, an airbox gasket, the O-ring on the bowl, and the seal on the nut would all be replaced. Question number 1 here, how do you check if the needle in seat is sealing? You apply 1 to 2 psi of air pressure to the needle and see if it holds that air pressure when the carburetor is upside down. At a shop, there's a special tool to do that, but the air pressure from your mouth works pretty good. After installing the carb, how do you reset the governor? You turn the governor shaft the same way that it turns to open the throttle, and you max it out, and then you lock down the lock. Here's the final assembly. Put on the tank and the fuel line. Put on the tank bolts and the nuts that hold it on the back. Install the spark plug. Put on the valve cover. Now these pieces wouldn't normally be taken off for a fuel system clean, but I was filming more than one job at a time. Put on the muffler. Put on this heat shield. Reinstall the starter. Air cleaner airbox. Done job. To set up this engine and have it run correctly, we need to adjust the RPM. This is a tiny TACH. This red wire is an induction wire. We wrap this 3 or more times around the spark plug wire, and that wire will read the signal by induction. Put that back on the spark plug, and then the clip just has to go in any metal part. So I'm going to put it on the exhaust stud, and then when we run the engine, this little tiny TACH will give us the RPM reading. Before we start the engine, we have to look at the screws we need to turn. So this black screw on top of the carburetor here is the idle speed screw. And on the other side, underneath the air box, you have to stick your screwdriver in the space here, is the high speed screw, but you can see it better from above. So here it is on the top. This is the high speed screw, and we'll have to adjust this one when the engine is running fast to get it within the right RPM range. So the correct speed for this engine is between 15 and 1700 RPM for idle, and between 3000 to 3200 RPM for high speed. So here we go. Got the engine idling, and we're going to read the tiny TACH. A little hard to see. It says 2000 RPM. Right there. So I need to slow this engine down. So I'm going to put my screwdriver on the idle speed screw, turn it down about a half a turn, read the gauge, got it down to about 17, a little bit more, 16 and change. So that's pretty good, right in between our range. So it's reading 1610 or so. That's perfect. And now we do high speed. The engine responded very good. The speed says 3600, a little too fast. So I have to get onto that high speed screw. Everything's vibrating around like crazy. You hear the RPM come down a little bit. And now it says 31 and change, so that's perfect. Hey, we're all done job 3. Carburetor's clean and it's running at the right RPMs. Please find job 3 test. Have a good day.